Hello, Jackie. How are you?
Well, Dr. Miles, I'm well, and yourself?
Hey, that's great. That's great.
Good. Nice to be back on this evening.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. We had the 2 weeks off, and I know we needed the rest. We needed the
Yes,
rest. So what did you do?
yes. And we're back with one of my favorite topics, although one that I'm not that familiar with. So I'm looking
Yeah,
forward to tonight.
sounds good. Hey, listen, we're going to get started. We have people already signing in to us. But I do want to say welcome to our new guest. My name is Dr. Willie Miles. I am the president of Dr. Willie Miles Children's Foundation located in Atlanta, Georgia. And our purpose is very simple. Our mission statement is very simple. We make children our priority. So everything we do is going to be focused on children and children's issues. I'm going to occasionally connect those children issues with adult issues. And Jackie, who's always been wonderful, I want you to introduce yourself.
I am Jacqueline Hampton Clemens, a community educator, and just invested in children as well, and all resources that make children and our communities better.
Well, Jackie, we have the 2 weeks off, and I tell you, I want to take a little bit more time, but I thought our viewers would want us back. We've been getting a lot of emails from them saying, "Where are you all?" So we are now back.
Yeah.
But we need the rest, and when you don't take the time to take the rest yourself, guess what? Things begin to happen to you.
They do.
And so, Jackie, what you do on your little break? We had 2 weeks off.
Oh, so many other projects that needed attention. I did actually rest.
Mm-hmm.
And had a few no activity days, but also worked on some other things. What about you, Dr. Miles?
Hey, I very rarely rest, but I did get some me time. I'm really excited about that. And, we really need that. We always go hard at these things because we don't just see it as business, but it's personal for us because it's about people and it's about children. And our goal is to make sure that parents better understand their children, and hopefully they'll have better lives. All right.
Yeah.
So, Jackie, you send the lineup, right?
Have to remind them, Dr. Miles, that we also have children and families.
Oh, yeah, exactly. I do want to say that you saw the lineup of these the events we were doing. March 2nd, which is today, is what is ADHD, what causes it, and Jackie, do you have your schedule in front of you?
I don't. I can have it by the end of the.
No, that's quite right. I was going to have you read a few of those. March 9th, we're dealing with oppositional defiance. My child does not respect anyone. March 16th, depression and anxiety. What are the differences and what are the symptoms? These are all great topics, and I deal with these daily in providing therapy sessions for young people in the Atlanta area. On March 23rd, hyperactivity. How do I control it, and do children always need medication? That's one of the big questions that parents have. Do children always need medication? And the last one is going to be post-traumatic stress disorders. What are the causes and symptoms? And we just began to kind of like diagnose children with PTSD, and we still are very cautious about the age that we actually do the diagnosis with them. Mm-hmm. So without further ado, I guess we'll get started.
Let's do that. Dr. Miles, one of the things about this, again, not being a clinical professional, is having a lot of questions about these things myself. Mm-hmm. So if you don't mind, actually, I'd like to just kind of start out by actually asking a few questions.
Yeah, sure.
For instance, today I know we're talking about ADHD. Mm-hmm. What does that stand for? And can you give us some history on this?
Sure. Of course, the A stands for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And Jackie, it was very interesting. Parents hear these ADHD all the time, and sometimes they say HDAD. They get it all mixed up. All they know is something is happening with their child, and they trust professionals to diagnose them and to provide some sort of treatments for them. Right. But ADHD, Jackie, is really one of the common diagnoses among children. Interestingly, children between the ages of 3 to 17 years of age, over 5 million kids have that diagnosis. 5 million.
Wow.
And it's kind of amazing that in our practice, we see it happening even more. We're seeing more children come in with a lot of these diagnoses, many of the common diagnoses. Of course, ADHD is just one of them. Mm-hmm. And Jack, do you mind if I share a few more?
No, please do.
Yeah, we have ADHD, which is one. Then we have general anxiety, and you say, well, what kid has anxiety? I mean, what they're anxious about? They're not paying anything. Then we have general anxiety, separation anxiety, social phobias. That means children who are afraid to go out in the public, and they go out and they get very fearful. If they have they see water running, they get very, very fearful, and it's usually characterized by sleepless nights and a lot of crying. And of course, we have the post-traumatic stress disorders. And of course, that is simply that an event happened years ago, but the person responds as if it happened yesterday.
Right.
Usually children who have been abused will have those kinds of disorders. They'll have frequent thoughts about the beatings or frequent thoughts about, the burnings and so forth. And of course, the last one is obsessive compulsive disorder. And of course, obsessive compulsive is, of course, obsessive. That means, you focus on one thing, you have to do that all the time. So these are the kind of things that our children encounter. So that's
I want to say, Dr. Miles, not to interrupt you, but
sure.
I wanted to add that these things are also very common in adults. And honestly, we could probably have a workshop on each one of these. I think anxiety is another very diagnosed or under-recognized condition amongst all of those.
Yeah, I kind of want to share with you, and I'm glad you said that, because what makes us so unique in our programming is that we actually connect the dots. Many parents come to us and thinking we're talking about children, but what we're doing is showing the parents their child and what ends up happening if their child does not get treatment. And many parents have ADHD, or many parents have anxiety.
Exactly.
And you can pretty much tell that they probably had anxiety when they were young and they never got the treatment. And so Jack, what they don't want the same thing for their children. They want to make sure their kids get treated so their children grow up being mentally and emotionally healthy.
Right. And I know we're going to get more into how to recognize it a little bit later, but there's another term out there that's often used that I also just want to ask you about right now, so that as we talk about things, and probably there have been some parents who recognize it. What does NOS mean?
It's kind of
a common diagnosis for children.
Yes, it's kind of interesting. That really is not a diagnosis. What's very, very interesting, many times the children will have a diagnosis and they will see NOS. The parents may say NOS at the end. They say, what does nose mean? And they won't ask anybody. But what that really means is that nothing else has been specified. We don't know exactly what may be causing it. So we say, hyperactivity, NOS, or anxiety, NOS. That means we don't have enough information to say what else may be causing it.
Right. And while we're going over this, I'm going to go ahead and invite any parents who are on with us who've experienced any of this to go ahead and put questions in, or, just let us know that this is a topic that is hitting home for you. So, can you tell us more about what the CDC says about the percent of children? I know we talked about the 3 to 17, the 5.9 million kids. Are we seeing that these numbers are higher in children of color?
Oh, I would, when you start looking at the research, what's interesting is that the research and the data is showing, it says that Black children don't have this diagnosis as frequent as other children. But what we're seeing in our practice and what we're seeing in the schools is that they're getting their diagnosis. They're getting those diagnoses very, very rapidly. And Jackie, on a daily basis, I would say that I would see, I say daily, on a weekly basis, I would see about 25 children who are between the ages of 6 to 12, who have that diagnosis of ADHD and or has had it.
Okay.
Right.
So I know some people are kind of skeptical about that sometimes. They say, oh, we used to be active. They didn't call us anything. Can you tell us some of the causes of ADHD to help people understand that this is a legitimate condition?
It's kind of interesting when you talk about that, because it's important who you ask. Parents will say, ain't nothing wrong with him. I was active and I ran around and I hopped and all that. And they find excuses for their child's behavior.
Right.
But what's very interesting, when you talk about the causes of ADHD, it is a neurobiological issue. It is a neurobiological issue which involves the brain. Now, the issue is that there are some precipitating factors. For instance, home environment.
Okay.
Let's just talk about that for a second. With the ADHD, home environment, if children are in disruptive environments and loud environments and active environments, and there's always energy, that exacerbates the ADHD. Now, I want to be very clear now, that does not cause the ADHD. And research shows that ADHD can be hereditary. So the point of the matter is, parents who have children who have a diagnosis of ADHD, what it means, I'm going to slow it down a little bit. You know, what does the A stands for, and the D and the HD? The whole thing is that the children they're having a attention deficit. And what is attention deficit? It is, I can't focus. You know, I get very frustrated when I sit a long time. You know, I began to twiddle my thumbs, and I began to move my feet, and I began to, you know, roll down the chair and sit back up in the chair. And the parents keep saying, sit still, you can't sit still. Well, you're right.
And I was about to say, you know, as an educator and a former classroom educator, that's often the one thing they're asked to do in school. Sit still, right? Okay.
And that's how they actually measure some of the child's benchmarks. But I want to spend just a little bit more time on that, because we're talking about environmental factors. We're talking about parents thinking that, you know, something they did caused it. Well, what they did, Jackie, they didn't do really anything. What they're doing is exacerbating it by, you know, now, according to what research you look at, some research says that the games help the child because the child learns how to focus. But guess what? But that may have the attention part of it, but the hyperactivity part still has to be dealt with. And so, can there be two labels? The answer is yes. A child can be ADD, just attention deficit.
Right.
Yep.
And you know, I have to chime in on the conversation about the games, Dr. Miles. I'm looking forward to the research, because we know that children now, as early as a year, 2 years old, certainly by 3 years old, are holding devices, cell phones or what have you, and they're in front of very active games, very animated games at an early age. And so I'm looking forward to the research that talks about perhaps that impact, because I mean, this ADHD was not being diagnosed at the same levels when I was in grade school, and probably not when you were in grade school. Doesn't mean it wasn't there necessarily, but
well, it's been a long time since I was in school now. But the point is, I probably would have been diagnosed with hyperactivity, because I speak fast, I move fast, I think fast. Now, there's one of our parents parents who says she has a 2 to 4 year old child. How do you know if ADD are just an active child?
It's one and the same.
Miss Books, I guess Miss Book or Mr. Books. Guess what? You'll know, because you will not be able to rest. I mean, it's not just active, it's hyperactive. That means going the whole day without resting, and they're always moving. If your child has hyperactivity, you won't have to question whether or not you know it or not, because you'll be exhausted.
And you know what, Dr. Miles, that leads us right into the symptoms, and you've kind of started talking about them already. Can you tell us more about those symptoms? And I call them also signs that'll help parents.
You know, again, everything we do is developmental, which means that, and the parent's question was quite relevant. She says, what about a 2-year-old toddler? And that's why we don't like diagnosing children too early, because some of it's just development, and some of it is the lack of discipline, you know, helping the child structure his day and so forth. Now, if you're a parent who is just don't have any limits, your child's going to be everywhere. But with hyperactivity, if your child really has it, you're going to know it. There'll be no questions about it, because one, you're going to be exhausted. Plus, the child will never be able to focus on anything. I mean, they're going to always be very bored with a toy, and 2 minutes or less with a toy, going somewhere else, and constantly moves. Also, you're going to find that children who usually have the diagnosis have sleepless nights, and they're usually irritable most of the day. And they're irritable because they can't find anything to satisfy them. It's like, have you ever thought about, like, you're trying to focus, but you can't, so you get upset? It's like seeing a fuzzy TV, and you keep saying, I want to see the real TV. And I'm getting frustrated. Well, it's the irritability. It's poor concentration. It is impulsivity. That means just go to the table, knock things off the table, just
Right.
and pull things off the shelf. And that's what I'm saying. There's no question about it. When the child, if the child has it, you will know because he or she has a non-exhaustive amount of energy, a non-exhaustive amount of energy.
And I think, again, you gave some very good examples. For instance, I personally believe a 2-year-old should be active, but to your point, that active 2-year-old is then going to sleep at night, right? Because they've been exhausted. I believe that, children should have a certain amount of physical activity and run around. So you make excellent points about the fact that if that is ongoing and insatiable, and it doesn't matter what happens and they're not sleeping through the night, then you've got possibly some signs. But again, you do want to be careful.
But before you go to the next one, but I do want to say that it's going to be important that parents know their children. For instance, if your child's in daycare all day and they're active, the school is going to say, come and get them. The school is going to let you know that he's too active. And you can't say, well, oh, they just don't like my child. My child is wonderful. He's just growing or she's just growing. Parents, I want to share with you that when your children have some of the symptoms of hyperactivity is exactly what the first part of the word says, hyper. It ain't just active, it's extreme activity. Right. It is not getting tired. It is crying throughout the day. It is now again, they may not have all these symptoms, but my point is that once they begin to, Jackie, show you like they can't sleep, they're whining all day.
They will have a number of them.
They're going to follow you all around.
Multiple symptoms.
Right. Those are some of the symptoms. And, Jackie, they can become severe. Before you move, I just want to do a connect the dot, right?
Okay.
I want to connect this because parents, as you are looking at your child, I want you to reflect back on your childhood. Reflect back on your childhood and take a look at where you are right now. If you're anxious right now, you probably were anxious when you were young. And the problem you have is that you went undiagnosed. So between the years of being young and now being a mature adult, a whole bunch of stuff happened that you regret. And most of it happened because of the diagnosis that you didn't have.
Exactly.
I
didn't
want you to
understand it, therefore you couldn't monitor it.
Exactly. I want you all to become relaxed with getting therapy. I would much prefer to have it than not to have it. Because if I have a diagnosis, the years between being a young person and then being an older person, guess what? I'm going to minimize the trouble I got into. I'm going to minimize the poor relationships I got into. I'm going to minimize the anger I got into. I'm going to minimize all the negative things. So as an adult, I'm functional, I'm happy, and I have harmony in my life.
Right.
Most adults who don't have the harmony didn't have issues treated when they were much younger. Jackie, I do want to say we have a little time, and what I don't want to do is speed through it. So I'm just going to take some time to make sure that our parents really understand this ADHD, because it's one of the most prevalent that our children are diagnosed with. So I want to make sure that you all, I'm sorry, Jackie, go on.
I was going to say, and Dr. Miles, also while you're explaining that, would also like you to talk about, how the parents should be communicating with the schools when we're both questioning, like before the diagnosis, during the process of diagnosing, and then afterwards, because again, our focus is on helping these students be their best. So please add that to your conversation.
If I can remember, it gave me a whole lot. Don't forget I'm ADHD.
Well,
I can't remember.
Right.
I can't remember all that.
How parents should be approaching the diagnosis. Because I know a lot of them, it comes from the school. You mentioned that. If they're asking you to come pick up your child, there's a reason. So then that's the time for that parent to start the process.
Well, I think that there are many things that parents should be aware of and know how to engage. The concern that many parents have when their children have these kind of issues, they're trying to figure out who to blame. They're not sure whether it's their genes or their husband's genes or Uncle Bubba's genes from 10 years ago. But many parents don't like the idea that no parent, that something's wrong with their child, and they begin to feel guilty. So they try all the remedies they can. They try to make sure they get them a lot of toys. They try to make sure that they are talking to them. They take them to various people's homes. But if the report is the same, that this child can't sit down, this child moves all the time, it's not just development. And if you think it's development, I encourage you to get a book on childhood development, and you'll begin to see that children between the ages of course, 1 and 3 are going to be active. They're going to move. But
Right.
even with the 3-year-olds, you can see an exaggerated movement. To me, ADHD is, of course, the activity is what you see. Now, the attention, you probably won't be able to detect that too quickly because it's a focusing issue. And of course, focusing is developmental.
Right.
So you may be saying that, oh, he's 2 years old. You know, he can't sit there for like 10 minutes and watch something.
Right.
I get it. You may be saying, guess what? He's 3. Yeah, it's still too young. But our children should be able to start focusing for some periods of time. Children who have the diagnosis, Jackie, they have great difficulty focusing. I do want to share that many of the kids who are in virtual school right now are having big problems. They can't focus on the screen. And Jackie, I sit in many IEP meetings, and the schools are saying, well, there's really nothing we can do. Have them do some work, have them do something. And I keep saying, well, you asking them to do the something is almost impossible. I'm not making excuses for them, but they cannot sit at that screen for 4 hours. They can't do it.
No,
and then parents
can't do it.
And then parents get confused. The parents say, well, they can play that darn video game all night. Don't forget, the video game is fast and swift.
And
so
constantly changing.
It's engaging them, exactly.
Yes.
So the first part you mentioned is what should I do in the very beginning? Like, how do I notice these symptoms? You know, and I'm saying that you won't have to say, how do I notice them? Because they'll notice you. But the biggest thing people don't do this. Don't start screaming at them and to sit down, sit down. You can't, because what you're then doing is messing with self-esteem.
Right. And also, again, I want to add again, being an educator, don't try to hide it from the school. If you're seeing it at home, don't think they're not seeing it at school. So again, it's time to start a conversation, because if your child is doing the same thing at school, they're not learning. And then when you start to get the bad grades, again, you're screaming at the child, you're upset at the child, and all of it is a lack of understanding a condition that is going on, or possibly that.
Exactly. And all we're saying is that don't be afraid to get your child treatment. And let's talk about the treatment a little bit. Let's talk about what happens when you finally decide to before I go there, let me deal with the parents who are on here who are foster parents who have children who have ADHD. Parents, I want to share with you that your child's situation is exacerbated. I mean, so they have ADHD, but they also have some separation anxiety. So if the child has 2 or 3 diagnoses, it's just you're having a very difficult time, and you have to have patience with them. The hyperactivity is one in itself. Then the child has separation issues. Then the child may have some psychosis issues. And psychosis is simply that the child sees or hears something that doesn't exist. And so the parents who have foster children, many of them are going to be diagnosed with ADHD. So can somebody say amen on there or something? Can I see something on the screen? They're going to be diagnosed with that. And
do we have any parents on who are experiencing this? Again, if so, let us know in the chats. We just want to make sure that we're hitting the target here.
Also, children who are in foster care are going to have these separation issues, and they may have some anxiety and depression. So what you have 4 diagnoses. You have hyperactivity, ADHD. They're going to have some anxiety. They're going to have depression, and they're going to have some separation issues. And unfortunately, well, it's not fortunate, unfortunately, but parents, for many children who are in foster care, due to the nature of their neglect and or abuse, they may experience PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder. And you say, well, how can a child experience that? Well, how they experience is that they go to sleep at night, they have dreams about whatever happened to them, or throughout the day. They look like they're daydreaming, but they're really thinking about what happened to them. And so
they're kind of stuck there.
Yeah, this really is an education process for Jackie, it's for community, because we're talking about mental health now, and our community is not so aware and so abreast and accepting.
And Dr. Miles, let's not pretend also that this hasn't come up in legal cases where police are handling situations where we're probably dealing with some of these very factors that you're talking about. So the more our parents know about a situation, the more they can help protect our kids and our communities. can you elaborate, Dr. Miles, on what anxiety looks like? That's such this, oh, you got anxiety. What does that mean? What does it look like?
Well, anxiety is the child always looking as if he or she is waiting for something to happen. And it manifests itself through, of course, it is a mood disorder. So it manifests itself by sometimes sitting alone. It can be manifest itself by being fearful. It can manifest itself by not even having the energy to do something. Like, and you said, well, why is a child anxious? Well, I can tell you that very, very easily. The child can be anxious by this very same reason that you get anxious, except theirs is on a lower level, lower something, meaning that they may be worried about whether or not they're in foster care and you're going to get rid of them tomorrow.
What about panic attacks? Is that part of the anxiety disorder? Or
well, I don't want to mix them together, but I do want to say though that those are they're separate, but they can co-occur. For instance, the panic attacks. The panic attacks is a derivative of anxiety, of course, and it exacerbates so much. Whereas you start thinking that you're having a heart attack. It just you have breathing issues. Your chest gets heavy, and with children, they experience some of the same things when it comes to anxiety. So I'm sorry, experience the same thing when it comes to the panic attacks. And the panic attacks come on without notice. Like you're not going to be talking right now, right?
And all of a sudden,
you can't breathe.
Right.
And so it's so scary that the adults usually call 911. For children, you're going to start seeing their behaviors. You're going to start seeing things happen to them before they have panic attacks. And for panic attacks with children, it's a very frightening situation because the child doesn't know what's happening. And if you've not witnessed it before, you most certainly don't know what's happening. And the problem that sometimes the parents don't understand, and they'll say, sit down, stop it, without taking a look at what is really happening. That the child is really emotionally disturbed. When I say emotionally disturbed, it's really going through something.
Right. Going through something.
And, and there's there's an assumption, Jackie, that children don't experience things. That's still there, that they don't have
I don't know where that would come from, as if they're not human and probably experiencing it, in many instances on greater levels than we do, because we have more coping skills and they don't.
Exactly.
And while we're on this, Dr. Miles, I can tell you, I've been through some of these situations personally with my own children. I also think it's important for parents to start identifying professionals in these fields and using them as a resource. And this is, like you said, this is developmental. A lot of these things are just going to occur over the course of a child's life at some point or another, or some of these things are, situations that will be diagnosed. But all of our sessions go back to parents being aware and informed as their children grow and being able to be that guide and that assistant.
You brought up a point about the therapist, and I want to go there at this point. Parents, it's going to be very important that when you're talking about getting therapeutic services, don't assume because someone is licensed that they are experienced.
Or that they're the best one for your child.
Right.
It is a process.
Right. Don't assume that because someone else's child did well at a particular agency or hospital, that your child will do better there. It's going to be very important that you meet a therapist and make sure that you guys have connected. Parents, if you've not connected with them, don't use them. Because if they cannot connect with you as a parent, I most certainly would not want to trust my child with them, as a patient. Now, I'm not putting my colleagues down. I'm just being very straight with you. It's going to be very important that you get the right therapist for your child and for yourself.
Well, just think about it, Dr. Miles. Anyone trying to treat a child without having first established a relationship and rapport with their parent, I mean, any professional will know they can't thoroughly treat that child without that understanding, because the parent is the source of so much information.
I'm going back to even not a rapport with the parent. I'm talking about whether or not you match a person when you meet them by their attitudes and how they talk to you.
And don't ignore it.
if you don't feel welcomed and warm and supported, that's the wrong person for you. Some clinicians believe that their responsibility is to just listen. And oftentimes we're taught that. But our responsibility is to do more than just listening. It is to offer the parents some other solutions and to make sure that we're meeting that child's needs. And meeting that child's needs is really finding out what are the root causes of the anxiety. What are the root causes of his or her ADHD? What are the root causes of this separation anxiety, which simply means that I have to understand the child's full history. And I don't have to understand the child's full history, but I tell practitioners, treat the clients like you want someone to treat your loved one. And, I'm just going to say it again and try to find practitioners who have a specialty. If you go and get a practitioner who says, oh, I can do everything, I'm not going to say run, but I'm going to say, you may not want to get that one.
Keep going.
Because you want someone who has a specialty. Like, for instance, my specialty is adolescents, traumas, and the LGBTQI community. That's my specialty. So that's who I deal with. And so if they told me, I want you to deal with somebody who's geriatric, I'll say I'll take them, but that ain't my specialty. Mm-hmm. Are you with me? Mm-hmm. So your therapist should have a specialty.
And most certainly, Dr. Miles, I would imagine you want to make sure that they are, have experience with youth if you're taking your child there.
Right.
Right.
That's most important. And I'm going to say many of them, they do because many of them are licensed. Some are unlicensed. And those who are unlicensed, of course, works under a licensed person. So don't worry about the licensure part for the ones who are not licensed. In most states, you cannot work with children in therapy or in counseling unless you're working under somebody who has a license. But I do want to say, I want to take some time on talking about choosing the right professional. Because if you choose the wrong professional, that will turn your child off to even wanting to see the person in treatment. Ask questions like, what kind of things are you going to work with them on? Can I see some of the activities that you're going to, not that you want to be in therapy, because you should not be there, because the practitioner and the child has to get their own trust. But I'm saying as a parent, you can say, like, what kind of things you're going to work on? Also, when your child comes out of therapy, how did it go? And the child says, it was just boring. Well, you may want to tell the therapist what he said. It was a little bit boring, So with me, I use
communication.
Yeah, I use puppets. And I was joking with the practitioner today. I said, I got the puppets for my 8-year-old. My 12 and 13-year-olds love the puppets. so my 13-year-olds and 14-year-olds engage more with the puppets than they want to engage with me. So the point is that we have to make sure that the practitioner feels the industry they're in and they're really committed to it. So therefore, your child would receive the best service. So you may have to shop around a little bit before you actually find the one who fits your family. Don't just grab the first one out of anxiety. Oh, my child got ADHD. Give me anybody who can talk to him.
Right.
No, slow it down.
Right. And even after a few visits, don't be afraid to switch if you see that it's just not working out. Sometimes a couple of visits, sometimes maybe during a visit, a child may lose trust in that professional based on something they said. Right. So, Dr. Miles, what is your advice, for instance, if a child, let's say they went to a couple of sessions, but then says, I really don't want to see them anymore?
Well, Jackie, to me, it's like the same way about school. When children come on complaining about teachers, I'm going to check on that teacher, see what's really going on.
Exactly.
So just like if this service is like any other service, I mean, these are children. So first of all, let's turn it around. I wouldn't drop my child off. I would let my child go in behind closed doors with someone who they don't feel comfortable with.
Right. That says a lot right there.
Because I'm not there. I can't, you can't go and sit with them. Right. Because it's a therapy session.
Right. And what do you think happens if you force them to be around someone that they've told you they're not comfortable with?
Now, I do know, and I share with parents, it does take some time for the rapport, as Jackie was saying, to build. But the child's not going to say, I don't like this person during rapport building. The child's not going to say, oh, I don't feel comfortable with them during rapport building. Are you with me?
Yes.
And if the child does feel that, don't forget now, we're in psychology and social work. If the child feels uncomfortable, we ought to be seeing it. We ought to see the child's uncomfortable. And therefore, if the child's uncomfortable, then we have to do some other activities with them. And so that's why parents, I'm saying, Jackie, just, it's important that parents take their time find a great practitioner. If you are if the child's in foster care, I think it's critical. I think it's critical that you find a great practitioner, because oftentimes those children are just assigned someone. I'm not saying haphazardly, but they're just assigned someone who can meet the court mandate that they have to have therapy.
Right, right.
Yeah.
So very important. Listen to the child and pay attention to all those signs, and realize that it is okay to switch therapists. It's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. Let's see. So let's talk a little bit about medication and diagnosis or misdiagnosis.
Gotcha. Well,
What do you know about the medications?
Well, there are several medications that are good for children who are ADHD, and some of our parents are using it. And Vyvanse is one, and Adderall is the second one. Adderall XR is the third one, which, and XR simply means extended release, which simply means that the capsule the child gets has little small beads in it, and it's released throughout the day. Some children need that because oftentimes, especially if they're in school, they will get medication and you can tell when it wears off. And God forbid it wears off before they get home, because the school's going to call you. Right. So you can tell the doctors, well, before I go any further, I think it's important also not jacking on with the practitioner, but establish a good relationship with the doctors. The doctors don't know everything. You got to tell them, oh, this medication is knocking my child out. Medication is not supposed to do that. Medication is supposed to make the child functional.
Well, Dr. Miles, I also think you might have skipped a step here, because one of the things I had to learn, there's a difference between your therapist and the doctor who prescribes medication.
Yeah,
there is two different people.
I'm going to say this, Jackie. They should be aware, but in some cases, you may find a psychiatrist who will see the child, but usually they don't. They, especially in agencies, the psychiatrist is the treating physician, and they will see the child on a medical basis. The licensed person, who's the assessment person, will give recommend the first diagnosis. The doctor will confirm that diagnosis based upon what the parent and child are telling them. Now, parents, it's very important to understand this. They are making a snapshot decision based upon about a 45-minute to an hour and a half meeting with you and that child.
And whatever you're saying and told them, yes.
What should happen, though, is that once that child has been assigned a therapist, the therapist is supposed to go in and say, guess what? I'm not seeing what they have written as a diagnosis. The therapist is then supposed to go back and say, I'm not seeing what you all saw. I've seen the child 5 times, and I haven't seen the activity. I haven't seen the anxiety. And then what happens? They will change the diagnosis. So the key is, we can't assume that what the doctor says, you just got to go by it, because they only have a small snapshot of seeing the child for that 30 minutes or that hour or 2 hours, and they have a snapshot about what you say. So parents, you have to actually know how this works. And Jackie, you brought up a very good point. Knowing how it works simply means knowing the difference between the therapist, psychiatrist. Many of the psychiatrists are MDs, but in many agencies, the psychiatrist does not work for the agency full time. They're on a contracted basis.
They're contracted, yes.
Right. And the licensed person, which is the LCSW or the LPC, is the one that drives the clinical services. Right. And so, but the key is you must have an engaged therapist. For instance, I make sure that if I see the child is functioning, the medication is not working, I asked the parents, I said, how long has he been on medication? She said, well, he just started yesterday or just started 7 days ago. I said, well, in my sessions, he's still severely hyper. I said, we're going to try 2 more sessions, see what happens. After 2 sessions, if I don't see that child being calmed down, I then send an email to the doctor and say, listen, I don't see the medication working. It needs to be either increased or decreased. The parents know about it also. And so that's the kind of communications that parents should have with the doctors.
And also understanding, and again, I'm speaking from many personal experiences, realizing that the doctor is going to see the child less often than the therapist. The therapist is going to see your child weekly or more than once a week. So the therapist is there providing therapy and solutions. The doctor did a diagnosis. So I think generally you check in with your doctor once a month, once every 60 days, sometimes once every 90 days, depending on it. So we want them to understand that difference as well.
Are there see the doctors as often as the insurance will pay for it? Because this is insurance driven. So,
Right.
but the point is, it's important that the parents know the process. For the foster parents, it's going to be very important that you know the process also. Of course, you do have the rights because the child is in your custody while you have them. If you have 3 or 4 children who have 3 or 4 diagnoses, you need to know what those diagnoses are, know what the medications are, understand the effects of the medication, and also know, what to expect from the children. So you won't be giving them things to do, which, sit down and focus. Well, I have ADHD. So we can provide some activities for the children. So we don't want to keep damaging self-esteem, especially with no kid, but especially with the children who are in foster care.
Right. And being able to have some reasonable expectations of that child's behavior, again, to avoid continuing to exacerbate the situation.
Yeah. I forgot one medication. I gave you the Vyvanse, I gave you Adderall, the Adderall XR, but I did not give you the most common one, Concerta.
Okay. All right. So those are some medications that they might see. I think we did talk a little bit also about misdiagnosis, meaning, between the doctor and the therapist, if what they're observing is not the same, there could be misdiagnosis. Did you want to expand on that at all, Dr. Miles?
Well, this doesn't rarely, it rarely happens when we get a totally wrong diagnosis. Well, I'll share with you, there's a lot of research on children, especially Black children, who are misdiagnosed. All right. And it carries on to school. And the problem with the misdiagnosis is that it's just like you having a misdiagnosis. You're being treated for something that don't even exist.
Mm-hmm.
And so I caution parents and I caution advocates on understanding the diagnosis. Don't just say, well, the doctor said it. Right. Google it, do something, find out about the child. So misdiagnosing does occur, and sometimes it occurs not just because of sometimes not being competent, but it occurs sometimes because, as I said before, the psychiatrist or doctor only has a snapshot of that child in the office usually for a 30, I think about an hour and a half.
30 minutes, about an hour.
Have to say, okay, I see something, but it normally goes by what the parent says and goes by the child's history. Okay. So parents, I really hope this is helping you all, because this is the first time we decided to make this very clear to you, the process. Because many times you have children who are diagnosed and you're just totally confused. Mm-hmm. Then you start saying, I need therapy too, which is not a bad idea. No, seriously, I tell parents, when you have a child who has a diagnosis, and especially 2, you may need some support.
And you can go through your own PTSD, whether you realize it or not. When you're dealing with a child that's had something dramatic, and as the parent, you jumped into, parent mode, you can have a reaction to that, subconsciously or consciously and down the road.
All right.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about, we did say that they can have misdiagnosis. Mm-hmm. You talked about whether they can have AD without the HD, and you said, mm-hmm. Of course, they could. We talked about why a lot of parents are afraid of these diagnoses and medication, and then why it's sometimes that the person who assesses the child will have a different diagnosis than the therapist. So I feel like we covered that. Parents, if you do have questions about it.
I want to talk about this for a second, about the fears. A lot of parents have been traumatized by poor practitioners. I'm talking about, and people, this is just real, about doctors who prescribe medication just for medication purposes. And I'm not saying it's not medically necessary, but I am saying that sometimes, the medication is too strong for those children. It's just way too strong. And then sometimes some doctors bounce back and forth, And you don't want that, because what it does for the child's body has to react to all the different medications. And so what I tell our clients is that I don't want the child's body to be in turmoil. I don't want his body to be jumping back and forth. I know we have to try medications, but we should be very close to knowing what he or she needs.
Right.
The first or second time. Now, there are adjustments that are needed, but my point is that every time you call, there's a different medication. You don't want that. You don't want that. And you may want to seek another doctor.
Okay. Very, very good information on the role of medication. Let's talk about some myths. I know they're out there. We started early on with some of these. If ADHD isn't a real medical disorder.
It's neurobiological. Guess what? It is a real disorder. It's a disorder. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Do children outgrow this?
Some children can. Oftentimes, it's according to the child. Many parents will say, well, I'm not going to treat him. He'll outgrow it. Well, it's according to the severity of the ADHD. Yeah, it's according to whether or not the parents are working and creating an environment that supports the ADHD versus all the activity, hypeness, and so forth. So children who are ADHD need to be provided with a calm environment. You don't want to exacerbate it. You don't want to keep saying, he already got it, so I got to play the radio, the TV, games.
And realizing that treatment can help them grow through it.
Right, exactly.
Grow past it.
And that's really the whole point of it. And Jackie, I'm glad we're having this, because I think that parents need to know that they play a critical role in these children's medical care and their mental health. So it's just important that you know some things, that you know what to look out for, and don't be afraid of this stuff. Folks, I mean, if you're afraid.
That's a big one, Dr. Miles. And I hope this conversation today is helping a lot of people realize, don't be afraid of it. Don't be afraid of the stigmas. Stop thinking it's just you and your child. This is the very common occurrence. It's happening across all socioeconomic lines. So do not think that this is something that's only hitting, don't think, oh, this only happens if there's bad parenting or something. These are neurological situations caused by a lot of factors. But treatment is important.
Well, you got 5 million children also, so you're not by yourself.
Right. So I think those things are very important. Okay, there's another myth out there that this only affects boys.
It does not only affect boys. The issues that we see more boys being diagnosed with it. And girls normally are not diagnosed with it. They are usually diagnosed with inattentiveness. Boys are usually diagnosed with the ADHD. In current times, we are seeing it level off, though. We're not seeing any sex or gender deviations from it. For instance, as many of my clients are boys that are girls who have the ADHD. But I do want to emphasize, for those children who are in foster care, it's going to be very important that foster parents do no harm. And do no harm simply means know about the child, know the diagnosis, know the medications, know the symptoms, and know also things that may happen as a result of the side effects of the medication.
Because Dr. Miles, I'll tell you, what you're saying I think is so key, because so often I think there are parents who feel like they don't need to know. They're going to rely on other people to know, be it the teachers or the therapists if they happen to get that far. And so again, it is very important, the point you make, that parents know and have some idea of what's going on with their child. So there are 2 other major areas that I'm hoping we can get to, because I know we're getting near that time, but I think they're very important. One is the myth that ADHD is caused by a lack of discipline. I've heard it often.
Many parents think that, not only many parents, but many grandparents think that he's so wild because you ain't raising him. Well, it has nothing to do with that. Then, well, we didn't have ADHD in our ADD, we didn't have it in our days. Well, you have to tell mom, guess what? Things are a little bit different. And we didn't have a whole lot of things in your days. And I would say also just be cautious about who you allow to input things into your children, especially when they already have a diagnosis. All right. So the key is, it's not because of lack of discipline. Now, the lack of discipline can exacerbate it. You know, for instance, I have ADHD, but I'm allowed to run wild. Are you with me? I'm on medication.
Schedule, no structure.
I'm on medication, right?
Right.
But I'm still able to. I'm not able to play the music real loud. I'm able to play all the games. And Jackie, what's amazing? Many of these kids' bedrooms have become game rooms.
Oh, absolutely.
But the parents have bought it
during this pandemic, and they're not coming out.
The parents have bought this 672-inch television. I'm seeing this now. I'm seeing Nintendo Switches. I'm seeing so.
And
then they
these
say, well,
game consoles that the kids, you know, are coveted, and they literally spend 7 days a week in the house.
Well, the thing about it, it's not just in the house. I'm talking about more side. We're talking about, of course, the interaction on the game. So what I'm talking about is parents complain that their kids are not sleeping. And I'm saying, would you sleep with all that in your room? And that not only do they have that, but the kids have the phones. Now, I'm not against this stuff. I'm just saying you may be adding to the problem.
Right. Very good points. Okay. I have one more to get in that I'd like to address, and that is, does diet affect ADHD?
It's kind of amazing. That has been an issue for a very, very long time, saying that, not does it affect, they're saying, does it cause it? And they try, let's get them off all the reds, all the red foods, all the red dye. Let's get them off all the carbohydrates. Anything that's white, don't let them eat it. And now it does have an impact, but guess what? Diet affects everything.
Right. Now,
but the diet does not cause it. So the key is, yes, the diet can cause some problems with the child who has, okay, you want to get him some candy, he already has ADHD. You want to buy him a whole cotton candy, and he already has ADHD. So it's that kind of thing I'm talking about.
You want to treat it with sugar.
Right. And so it's all these mood disorders can be worse if things are not controlled. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So if I had a child who had the diagnosis, it's just like child-proofing your house with a toddler. Right. Make sure everything is covered. So if my child has ADHD, I'm going to be conscious of, guess what? The music can't be playing too loud, first of all. I'm going to restrict the time he plays on the games. Mm-hmm. Parents, just FYI, I'm not sure it's still on those boxes, Jackie, but on the boxes for the games, it used to say that prolonged usage of these games can cause seizures.
Oh my.
Can cause seizures. And they warned parents, it was a caution, warned parents not to let the children play more than 2 or 3 hours on the game. So the key is that parents, we have to just get control.
Right.
We just have to get control.
What's our word, Dr. Miles? Deliberate and intentional.
Intentional, exactly.
Deliberate and intentional parenting. And that really is the backdrop of all of our workshops.
Exactly.
Parent on purpose. Stop thinking that all you got to do is put a roof over their head and feed them, and that everything else is treated elsewhere. There's a lot more going on.
You need to be aware. I just hope that we've been effective in giving our parents, and especially all of you all, but for the foster parents on, I know, information on ADHD. And of course, this is just one of the diagnoses. There are many others that we'll be talking about this entire month. I do want to say, as we're about to close out, that for the foster parents who are on, you'll be getting some instructions from your coordinators about how to get credit for being on here tonight. And we'll make it very, very simple for you, but I'll just give you some tidbits. One, do a snap, what do you call it? I forgot the name of it. A screenshot of Jackie or I on here. Mm-hmm. When you get ready to submit for the hours, you're going to email the title of the live stream, a screenshot of Jackie and I for each of them, and then you get 2 hours of credit for each of these meetings.
And Dr. Miles, if I could add, it may not be necessary, but I think it's also a good idea if even in the chat box, if they just kind of say, "I'm here,"
Yeah.
That shows up as well in case you have to go back and verify some classes, that'll be there. So just say hi in the chat, and of course, you're gonna appear.
Right. So, of course, we're almost out of time. I do want to say that this has been a great discussion. I hope we've been very, very clear about ADHD. And again, my goal was not trying to create doctors tonight. my goal was trying to create information for parents to be able to work with their children better and to better understand their children. On next week, which is March the 9th. Now, this is one that is also very common, and that is oppositional defiance. My child does not respect anyone. We get a lot of that, so next week, we'll talk about oppositional defiance. And parents, we'd like to encourage you to come with questions that you have not asked anyone before. I'll be more than happy to answer those. And hopefully we'll have other mental health practitioners. I'm going to try to get a licensed person to come on, and maybe they can share some more information with you. But again, Jackie, our goal was to be very practical and to make therapy relevant to people's lives, and that they are not scared when things happen. Right. Right.
And I want to say to Dr. Miles, I think most parents probably know of other parents who are experiencing this. So do a parent a favor and invite them to the show. Send them the link, let them know, because this could also help, children and some families. And that's really our goal.
All right, Jackie, we're at 5 minutes. And guess what? Unless people have some questions for me, I will stay on for like another 2 minutes. But I'd like to answer any questions and/or just put a comment in your comment box. Have we met your needs? Have we covered everything when it comes to ADHD? And are you a little bit more? Are you better informed about the diagnosis and how to process it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Things to look for, whether it's older or younger kids. Okay. So if you've learned anything new tonight that's going to help you be a better parent, we'd like just to hear that or see that in the chat. So that we can continue to bring you, let's say, programming that's useful.
But I also want to say, in closing, that we're making the connection between childhood and adulthood. And if you don't treat the child as in childhood with these diagnoses, he or she will confront it when they become adults. And if you don't believe me, look at yourself. And ask yourself, what treatment I didn't get?
Can see that in our own development, because again, therapy and treatment has been a big taboo in certain communities, and that's another thing that I think we're exposing and working towards correcting.
All right, Miss EKS Books, we want to thank you for your comments. You've been very active throughout the night, and all of you all. We hope to see you next week. Tell a friend about us. There's no charge for this. There's no charge, because children are our priority. Jackie, you've been great as usual. Thanks for serving as an interviewer tonight, and I just hope that we've been a blessing to those who've watched us. Again, I want to thank also Steve Turner, who is, I think he's the adoption manager for the state of Georgia. Okay. And he made sure that their foster parents got this information. So I'm really happy about that. So just like
Dr. Miles, always, I want to thank you as well for creating these series, bringing them on, sticking with it, and just helping families and children get better.
Okay. I'll say the same thing in my sessions. I'm done. All right. Hey, listen, have a great night. We'll see you next week. Be blessed.
See you next week. Good night.